In the far future, when the stars were already mapped by many races and the galaxy had been divided into known regions, there was one place that no one dared to enter. It was a quiet part of space shown on every galactic chart as human space. No one spoke about it. No one visited it, and anyone who tried to ask questions about it was quickly told to stop. There were old records that mentioned humans, but those records were very old and incomplete. It seemed as if they had once existed everywhere, and then suddenly they were gone. The official story said the humans destroyed themselves, but no one really knew if it was true. Kale was a young alien researcher who had always been curious about the things that others ignored. He worked in the central archive of the Orion Belt, where millions of data logs were stored. He liked to explore the forgotten corners of the archive, where dust collected on old metal shelves and old holograms flickered with strange light. One day while working on a project about lost civilizations, he noticed something strange when he searched for the word human. The system showed an error message and closed the screen. At first he thought it was a glitch, but when he tried again the same thing happened. It was as if the system itself was programmed to hide the information. Kale mentioned it to his colleague, who immediately looked nervous and told him to forget about it, but that only made him more curious. He wanted to understand why a name from history was blocked. So he started looking in older physical records that were not connected to the main system. He found small pieces of text fragments and images of creatures that looked very much like himself, but with softer faces and strange eyes. The captions under those pictures called them humans. The files described them as emotional, creative, and dangerous. There were also notes that said they once built ships that could cross galaxies without gates. As he kept reading, he realized that every story about humans ended suddenly, as if someone had stopped writing about them. There were no records of their fall, no explanation of where they went. The last entry in all records simply said, "The border must be respected." Kale felt something heavy in his chest when he read that line. It did not sound like a warning about danger. It sounded like a warning about something bigger, maybe something the galaxy was not supposed to remember. He went to his superior, Dr. Wren, to ask permission to research more about it, but Dr. Wren's expression changed as soon as Kale said the word human. He told Kale very calmly to delete his notes and never look into that topic again. He said that many researchers before had gone missing after asking the same questions. Kale tried to laugh it off, but the coldness in Dr. Wren's eyes made him realize it was not a joke. When he left the room, he noticed that 2 security officers were following him quietly through the corridor. They stopped when he looked back, but he knew they were watching him. That night he stayed in his small lab long after everyone had gone home. He turned off the main power so the security cameras would not see him and opened the old system again. This time he used a hidden terminal that connected directly to the lower archive layer. It was slow and old, but not controlled by the central network. He typed the word human again, and the screen flickered before showing a list of deleted files. He restored one of them, and a message appeared in a language he did not know, but the translator slowly turned the symbols into words. It said, "Do not cross the border. It is not empty space. It is sleeping space." The next file was a star chart showing the galaxy as it was thousands of years ago. In the center of the chart there was a large dark circle, and under it the words human space. Kale zoomed in and saw hundreds of dots that once represented human colonies, now all marked as destroyed or missing. He noticed something else. The dark circle was bigger than the chart he had seen in modern maps. It had grown over time. It seemed to expand slowly, consuming nearby systems like a shadow spreading across light. His heart started to beat faster. He saved the file on a private data crystal and shut down the system. He looked out the window where distant stars shone calmly, as if nothing had changed, but he could not stop thinking about that growing darkness in the center of the galaxy. He wondered if anyone else knew about it or if everyone pretended not to, because they were afraid to find out the truth. The next day he received an anonymous message on his communicator. It contained only one sentence: "Meet me in the deep archive level 4. He felt his throat go dry because that level had been closed for decades, but curiosity won over fear. He went there in secret. The old lifts still worked, but they creaked, like they could fall at any moment when the doors opened. The light was dim and dust-filled. The air waiting for him was an old archivist sitting beside a small lamp. The old man smiled weakly and said, "I knew someone like you would come one day." Cale asked who he was. The old man said he had been part of the last research mission that tried to enter human space. He said the mission was erased from all records and everyone who returned was ordered to stay silent. He was the only one who broke that rule, and he had lived in hiding ever since he handed Cale a small crystal similar to the one Cale had used before and said this belonged to a human. Long ago they gave it to us as a warning, not as a gift. Do not try to open it until you are far from here. The man's eyes looked tired but full of sadness. He told Cale that some truths were too heavy for a single mind. Cale wanted to ask more, but before he could speak, the lights flickered and a siren echoed through the hall. The old man pushed him away and said, "Go now, they have found you." Cale ran back to the lift holding the crystal. Close when he reached his lab, he saw security drones scanning the area. He hid the crystal inside his coat and escaped through a service tunnel behind the storage room. He did not stop running until he reached the outer docking bay where his small ship was parked. He left the station that night without telling anyone. When he was far enough from the main sector, he took out the crystal. It had a soft blue glow. He placed it into the ship's console, and the screen filled with strange symbols. Then slowly it formed into a map showing a single set of coordinates. The coordinates pointed to the edge of the dark circle, the place marked as human space. His hands shook, but at the same time he felt something pull him forward, a sense that he was meant to see what was hidden there. He looked out at the endless stars and whispered to himself, "If no one else will find the truth, then I will." He turned on the ship's engines and set the course toward the forbidden border as the stars stretched. Into long white lines he remembered the old man's words and the fear in Dr. Wren's eyes. He wondered what kind of power could make entire civilizations stay silent for centuries. He felt a mix of fear and excitement. He wanted to know who the humans really were and why their name was erased. He also wondered what could be waiting for him in the silent dark. Beyond the edge of the map, as his ship traveled through deep space. He recorded his thoughts in a log in case something happened. To him he spoke softly, saying, "My name is Cale, researcher of the Orion Archives. If this message is found, know that I went to find the truth about the region called human space. If I do not return, do not forget that it exists." He stopped for a moment before ending the recording because deep inside he knew that people would still choose to forget. He looked at the star chart again. The dark circle seemed to get larger the closer he moved toward it, and the stars around it looked dimmer, as if the light itself was afraid to go near. He could see faint lines of static on his navigation screen. The system kept warning him about an unknown signal, but he ignored it and continued. He felt a strange vibration through the floor of the ship, as if something far away was humming. It was not loud, but he could feel it inside his chest like a heartbeat. He slowed down the ship and stared at the black horizon ahead. There were no stars, only darkness that seemed to move slightly like a curtain in the wind. He whispered, "It is not just empty space." Then he saved the coordinates and turned off the lights inside the ship so that he could see better. Outside, he thought he saw small flashes like faint blue lights deep within the blackness. For a moment he imagined shapes moving, huge shapes that were not ships or asteroids, but something alive. He blinked and they were gone. He wondered if his mind was playing tricks on him. He sat quietly for a long time, watching the dark border. He felt that crossing it would change everything, but he also knew he could not turn back. Now he had already crossed the line of fear. He said softly to himself, "They called it human space. But maybe it is something else. Maybe it is where the truth sleeps." The ship drifted closer and closer until the sensors began to lose signal, and the stars behind him started to fade. Then everything outside went completely silent. Cale's ship drifted near the dark border, and the silence around him was deep and heavy, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He could not hear the hum of his engines anymore, only the faint sound of his own heartbeat inside his chest. The stars behind him looked far away and weak, as though light itself did not want to follow him into this place. He checked his instruments, but they showed strange readings. His radar turned blank and his communication screen showed random symbols that made no sense. He tried to adjust the settings, but the system kept freezing, then shutting down again. He sat quietly for a long time trying to think of what to do. He remembered the map from the crystal and the message that said it was sleeping space. He whispered softly. Maybe it is not dead space, maybe it is alive. He turned on his recorder and spoke into it, saying, "This is Kale. I have reached the edge of the human space. All systems are unstable, but I will continue forward for research purpose." His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to sound calm. He guided the ship slowly ahead, and the blackness outside seemed to thicken like a fog that swallowed everything. Then suddenly a signal appeared on his screen. It was faint, but it was repeating a pattern of 3 short beeps and 1 long tone. He checked the frequency and realized it was an ancient human distress signal, something that had not been used for thousands of years. His heart raced. He followed the direction of the signal, and after a few minutes a shadow appeared far ahead. It looked like a structure floating in space, half hidden by the darkness. As he came closer, he saw that it was a station. It was large and made of old metal panels that were covered. In scars from meteor strikes, it looked abandoned, but parts of it still gave off a faint blue light. His ship's scanner tried to identify it, but the name came out as corrupted text. He decided to dock and see if there was anything left inside. His ship's arm connected to the airlock, and the docking light turned green. He took his helmet and flashlight and stepped into the station. The air inside was cold and dry. The corridor walls were covered in dust and thin strands of frozen particles that looked like webs. There was no sound except the echo of his footsteps. He saw broken panels and old signs written in human language. Some letters were missing, but he could still read part of it. It said, "Research Section 4." He followed the corridor deeper inside and found doors that opened automatically when he came near them. It surprised him because that meant the power system was still working after all this time. He entered a large room filled with machines and control panels. Their lights blinked weakly as if struggling to stay alive. He saw old human symbols on the screens and tried to use his translator. The words slowly appeared in his language. They said, "Data access. Restricted authorized personnel. Only." He felt a small thrill because he knew that if the data was still locked, it must be important. He found a console that looked like it could still respond to commands. He placed his hand on it, and the screen lit up brighter. A voice spoke from the console. It was calm and human. It said, "Identity not recognized. Please state your purpose." Kale hesitated, then said, "I am a researcher. I come from the Orion Archive. I seek knowledge about humans and this region of space." The voice was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Access denied, reason classified." He frowned and tried again, saying, "Please, I only want to learn. I mean no harm." After another pause, the voice said, "One file available. Warning, viewing is not recommended. Do you wish to proceed?" He whispered. Yes, the lights dimmed and a hologram appeared in front of him. It showed a human man wearing a uniform. His face looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. He spoke in a language Kale's translator changed into words. "I am Admiral Solon of the Earth Defense Command. If anyone finds this message, it means the silence has been broken. We sealed this region for a reason. The things we found beyond our colonies were not meant to be touched. We called it the Deep Signal. It came from outside the galaxy. It changed our people. It made them build things that should not exist. We tried to destroy it, but it grew stronger. We created this border and erased ourselves from every record, so no one else would follow our path." The image flickered, and the Admiral's voice became faint. He said, "If you are watching this, turn back. The silence is mercy." Then the hologram vanished. Kyle stood frozen, his heart beating faster than ever. He whispered to himself. They erased themselves. The words felt impossible, but something deep inside him told him it was true. He looked around the room again and saw strange marks on the walls, like burns or symbols he did not recognize. He felt uneasy, as if the station was watching him. He turned to leave, but the console suddenly turned. On again, the same voice spoke, but now it sounded distorted. It said, "Intrusion detected, returning to standby." He felt a vibration under his feet. The whole station began to tremble. He ran through the corridor, trying to reach his ship as alarms started, flashing red lights along the walls. A loud metallic sound echoed through the halls like something huge was moving outside when he reached the airlock. The door refused to open for a moment. Then finally it slid apart and he jumped inside his ship, closing the hatch behind him. He looked through the window and saw the station slowly rotating. A deep blue glow started to form around it, like energy gathering in the dark. Then in a flash it disappeared completely, leaving nothing behind. Not even debris. His instruments could not detect it at all. It was as if it had never been there. He sat in silence, breathing hard, wondering if what he saw was real. He played the recording back on his console, but the file was blank. His heart sank. The ship's log had erased itself. He felt anger and fear rise inside him. After a while he calmed down and checked the crystal again. It still worked, and now it showed new coordinates. He realized the crystal was not just a map. It was reacting to what he discovered. It was leading him somewhere deeper into human space. He felt a cold shiver run through him. He knew he should turn back, but curiosity was stronger than fear. He thought about the Admiral's warning. The silence is mercy, but he could not stop now. He needed to know what happened to the humans and what the deep signal really was. He repaired the ship's engines and began to move toward the new coordinates as he traveled. He noticed strange signals appearing on his radar. They looked like shadows. Moving between the stars, his sensors showed no solid objects, but his eyes could see faint outlines like ghostly ships flying beside him. Sometimes he thought he heard whispers through his communication system, voices speaking softly in human tones. Though he could not understand the words, once he thought he heard someone say, "Help us," and the sound made his chest tighten. After many hours, he reached another structure. It was smaller than the station, but shaped like a beacon. It rotated slowly and gave off weak pulses of light. His scanner identified it as a long-range signal relay built by humans. He decided to get closer as he approached his ship's communication system. Suddenly came alive with hundreds of voices speaking at once. Some sounded like children, some like soldiers, some like old recordings, all mixed together, forming a noise that filled the cabin. He covered his ears and shouted for it to stop. But the sound kept growing until it turned into a single phrase repeated. Over and over it said, "You should not be here." He turned off the system completely and the voices stopped. He floated silently near the beacon, staring at it. The light from the beacon flashed one last time, and then it went dark. He felt tears in his eyes, though he did not know why. Maybe because he felt that something tragic had happened here, something too big for him to understand. He whispered, "I will find the truth even if it kills me." Then he turned his ship around and left the dead beacon behind. When he looked back one last time, he saw something that made him shiver. The stars behind the beacon were gone, replaced by a wide, dark shape that stretched across space like a shadow. Following him, he increased speed and moved away from it. As fast as he could, his mind kept replaying the words of the human admiral. "We erased ourselves so no one else would follow our path." Cale began to wonder if humans had not disappeared, but had chosen to become something else, something that the rest of the galaxy could not face. He kept traveling for a long time and finally saw the faint light of normal space again. The stars looked brighter, and his instruments began to work normally. He recorded a final message saying, "This is Cale returning. From the border of human space, I found human technology still active, and a warning that the silence is mercy. I will take this data back to the archives and continue my research." He ended the recording and sat quietly staring at the stars. He felt both relief and sadness, because deep down he knew he had crossed a line that was not meant to be crossed. As his ship moved away from the dark region, he saw one last faint flash behind him, a blue light like the station before, but smaller almost. Like an eye-opening in the dark, he watched it until it faded completely, then turned off his engines and drifted silently, thinking about what he had seen. He knew this was only the beginning, and that the silence around human space was not just fear but maybe protection for everyone else in the galaxy. Cale returned to normal space, but the darkness behind him stayed in his mind like a shadow that would not leave. He could not stop thinking about the voices, the message, the light that looked like an eye, and the words, "The silence is mercy." When he tried to sleep, he dreamed of empty corridors and human faces looking at him through glass. He woke up sweating and shaking. He told himself it was just his imagination, but something inside him whispered that it was not. His ship moved quietly through the stars, heading toward the nearest research hub where he planned to report his findings. When he arrived at the hub, everything looked normal. The traffic lanes were busy with cargo ships, and patrol drones. His landing was cleared without question. He felt a small sense of relief, but it did not last when he entered the dock. He noticed 2 officers waiting for him. They asked his name and purpose. He told them he was from the Orion archive. They nodded but did not smile. One of them said, "You have been gone for too long. Your signal disappeared weeks ago." Kyle frowned and said it was only a few days. The officer exchanged a quick look with the other and said, "Sir, our records show your ship vanished 32 days ago." Kyle felt his stomach twist. That was impossible. He was taken to a debriefing room where they asked him many questions about his journey, about the station, and about what he saw. He tried to explain, but every time he mentioned the words human space or human technology, the system recorder glitched, and the officers acted as if they did not hear him. One of them asked him to hand over his data crystal. He hesitated, but they insisted, saying it was for safety. He finally gave it to them, but as soon as they scanned it, the device overheated and turned. Black smoke rose from it, and the data was gone. They looked at him and said, "There seems to be no record of your journey. You may rest." Now Kale knew something was wrong. He left the room and went to his quarters, but he could feel eyes watching him from the cameras. He turned off the lights and sat on the bed thinking about what to do. The memory of the old man in the archive came back to him, and he wondered if the same thing was happening again. Maybe they were trying to erase him too. He took a small backup drive from his pocket, where he had secretly copied a few images from the beacon, and the station. He hid it inside the lining of his jacket, then tried to sleep. Late that night he was woken by a soft knocking on his door. He opened it and saw a woman wearing a maintenance uniform. She looked around carefully before stepping in. She whispered, "My name is Lyra. I used to work in deep research. You need to leave this station now." Kale looked confused and asked why. She said, "Because they know what you found. They have been waiting for someone like you, the last one who spoke about human space disappeared the next day." Kale asked how she knew about it. She said, "My brother was on one of the first teams that tried to enter the border. His ship never came back, but a message reached me before he vanished. It said, 'The silence is not empty, it listens.'" Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Kale felt the same chill he had felt near the dark space. He asked if she knew what the humans really were. She shook her head and said, "No one knows, but the Council hides everything connected. To them they say it is to protect civilization from fear, but maybe it is fear that protects them." She gave him a small metal case and said, "Inside is a map from the old archives. It will show you where the second beacon is hidden. It was discovered long ago but sealed under government control. I stole this copy from the records. Use it before they find you." He tried to thank her, but she stopped him and said, "Hurry, they are coming." Kale left the room quietly and moved through the maintenance tunnels. To reach his ship, the lights were dim and the hum of the engines in the distance made the air vibrate. He reached the dock and saw 2 security drones scanning the area. He waited until they moved away, then climbed aboard his ship. He started the engines and set the course to the coordinates from the case. The ship detached from the dock and entered hyperspace. He looked back and saw red lights flashing on the hub. Maybe they had already discovered his escape. He did not care anymore. He only wanted to reach the beacon and find the truth. The journey took several hours, and during that time he kept thinking about what Admiral Solon had said about the deep signal. He wondered if the humans had created something so powerful that it became alive. Maybe it was not just technology. Maybe it was something that thought and remembered. Maybe that was what waited in the silent dark. His instruments showed he was nearing the location marked on the map. It was near an old nebula that had lost its light long ago. He slowed the ship and scanned the area. There was nothing but gas clouds and dust until his scanner caught a small energy source hidden behind the nebula. He moved closer and saw a faint metallic structure buried within the fog. It looked like a tower standing alone in space, its surface covered in frost. He approached carefully and saw small lights flickering on its side like it was half awake. He decided to connect and explore. He wore his suit and entered through an open port. Inside it was even colder than the first station and very quiet. He floated down a long passage that led to a central chamber. There he found a single console glowing faintly. He touched it, and the screen came alive, showing human symbols again, activated his translator and waited. The system said Beacon 2 activation protocol standby. Then a new voice spoke. It was soft and female. It said, to whoever finds this, the Guardians are asleep, but they remember. We built the wall not to protect us, but to protect you. Do not wake them. Kale asked, who are the Guardians? There was no answer, only static. Then the console displayed a series of images. They were blurred, but he could see outlines of massive machines orbiting a planet. They looked like living ships made of both metal and flesh. He watched as beams of light shot from them toward space, and then the image froze. The words appeared saying, transmission. And Kale stood there, unable to move. The air felt heavy and his heart pounded. He realized now that the silence around human space was not caused by destruction. It was control. The humans had built something to guard that region, something that was still alive. He turned to leave, but before he could reach the exit, he heard a deep sound coming from somewhere inside the beacon. It was like a heartbeat, slow and distant. The lights around him began to pulse with the same rhythm. He felt it through his body, as if the entire structure was breathing. He ran back to his ship and took off as fast as he could. As he left the nebula, he looked back and saw the beacon glowing brighter than before. The pulse continued, echoing through space. He checked his communication system and saw a signal spreading from the beacon, repeating one word over and over. It said, awake, awake, awake. He shut down the receiver, but he knew it was too late. The signal was spreading across the stars. He felt fear rise inside him because he did not know what it would reach or what it would wake. Change course to a remote station where he could hide and analyze the data, but his navigation system kept showing errors and his fuel was dropping faster than normal. He realized the beacon's energy pulse had interfered with his systems. He had to land on the nearest planet to make repairs. He found a small barren world with a thin atmosphere and landed on its rocky surface. The sky was dim and the horizon empty. He stepped outside and felt the strange stillness of the place he worked on his ship for hours until the system stabilized. Then he sat on a rock looking at the dark sky. He thought about everything he had seen. The warning from the Admiral, the Guardians, the beacons, the words, the silence is mercy, and the message from Lyra's brother. He realized that the silence was not a natural thing. It was made to hide something that should never wake. Maybe the humans had tried to control it but lost themselves in the process. He looked up and saw a faint light far above, the planet. It was moving slowly across the sky like a ship, but larger, much larger. He watched it and felt both wonder and terror because it did not shine like metal. It glowed like a living thing. He recorded a message on his communicator saying, "This is Kale. I have activated Beacon 2. The signal is spreading. I do not know what it will do, but I feel it is calling something that has been waiting for a long time. If anyone finds this message, remember what the humans said. Do not wake them." He stopped recording and looked up again. The light in the sky had disappeared. The air felt heavy as if the planet itself was listening. He went back inside his ship and tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces of humans whispering words he could not understand. When he woke the next day, the ship's sensors showed multiple energy signatures moving across the system. They were coming from the direction of the beacon. He watched the screen and saw them growing stronger one by one. He did not know if they were ships or something else. He started the engines, preparing to leave. But before he could take off, the entire sky flashed blue and the ground trembled. He looked outside and saw streaks of light falling from space. Like rain, they hit the distant hills and disappeared, leaving behind clouds of dust. His ship's systems went offline again, and everything went quiet. He sat in the dark cabin, breathing hard and trying not to panic. Then through the silence he heard a faint whisper from the communication speaker. It was the same soft human voice from the beacon. It said, "You should not have come," Kale whispered. "I am sorry. I wanted to know the truth." The voice paused, then said, "Now you are part of it." The connection ended and his screen went black. He looked outside one last time and saw shapes moving in the distant mist, tall and slow and glowing blue like shadows walking through fog. He felt his chest tighten and whispered to himself, "The silence is not mercy. It is warning." Kale sat inside his dark ship while the ground outside still shook softly, as if something beneath the planet was waking. He could not move for a long time. He only listened to the strange low hum that filled the air like a deep song. Rising from the earth, his hands trembled as he tried to restart the engines, but the system stayed frozen. He looked out through the window and saw faint blue lines forming across the surface of the planet. They looked like veins of light spreading. Slowly in every direction, he realized they were forming a pattern, maybe a signal or a mark. He whispered softly to himself. This place was not empty. It was a part of them. He did not know if he meant the humans or the things they had made. He stepped outside again, wearing his suit, and felt the vibration of the ground beneath his feet. It was stronger now. The air shimmered faintly around him as if charged with energy. He walked toward a small ridge where he could see the open plain better, and what he saw made his heart freeze. In the distance, giant structures were rising from the earth. They looked like towers, but they moved like living creatures. Their surfaces glowed with blue light, and their shapes were strange, not made by any known race. He stood there watching as one of them turned slightly, and its surface rippled like water. He felt a wave of energy pass through him, and for a moment he could hear whispers again, voices speaking in human tones. The words were soft but full of sorrow. They said, "We warned you to stay away." He covered his ears, but the voices were inside his mind, not outside. He ran back to his ship, trying to escape. But when he looked at the sky, he saw more blue lights appearing among the clouds, shapes moving silently and slowly, forming a ring around the planet. He realized the signal from the beacon had not only awakened these things, it had called them here. Maybe from far away or from another dimension, he did not know, but he understood now why the humans had created the silence. It was not to hide themselves, but to keep these things from hearing the rest of the galaxy. He managed to start the engines using manual control and lifted the ship off the ground as he rose into the air. He looked down and saw the glowing lines forming symbols too large to understand. He turned the ship toward open space and pushed the engines to full power. The planet grew smaller behind him, but the blue lights followed. He tried to use his communication system to send a distress signal, but every frequency was filled with static. When he finally found a clear channel, a voice answered. It was soft and calm like before, but now it sounded closer. It said, "You cannot run from what you have awakened." Kale shouted, "Who are you? What are you?" The voice replied, "We are the Guardians. We were left behind to sleep until the signal came." Again he asked, "Why did the humans create you?" The voice said, "We were created to protect creation from itself." Then there was silence. He flew for hours through the system, trying to reach the outer edge, where he could jump to hyperspace, but his ship's engines began to lose power again. The same blue static appeared on the control panels. He realized the Guardians were not just following him. They were controlling space around him, bending it like fabric. His ship started shaking violently, and alarms blared. He tried to stabilize it, but the gravity field pulled him back toward the center of the system. He saw flashes of light outside, and then suddenly everything went dark. When he opened his eyes again, he was floating inside his cabin, with no sound and no movement. The stars outside were gone, replaced by a soft white mist that seemed to stretch forever. He looked at the instruments, but they showed nothing. It was like being inside a dream. He unbuckled himself and floated to the window. He saw a shadow moving in the mist. It was huge and slow, like a mountain drifting through clouds. Then a shape appeared closer to his ship. It was a human figure, glowing faintly blue. It floated outside without any suit and looked straight at him through the window. Its eyes were calm and sad. Kyle whispered, "Are you real?" The figure raised its hand and touched the glass. Though there was no sound, Kyle felt warmth spread through the metal. A voice spoke inside his mind. It was gentle and human. It said, "Do not be afraid. We are echoes of what once was." Kale asked, "What happened to humans? Where did they go?" The voice said, "They became what they feared. They touched the deep signal, and it changed them. They built the Guardians to protect others from the same fate, but in doing so, they joined with the Guardians and became part of the silence." Kale felt tears in his eyes as he asked, "Why did you call me here?" The voice said, "Because the silence weakens over time. It needed someone to remind the galaxy to stay away. Now you have seen, you must return and tell them what you saw before the others wake." He said, "I cannot go back. They will not believe me." The voice replied, "They will not need to believe, they will feel it soon. Then, the Light around the figure grew brighter until Kale had to cover his eyes when he opened them again. He was back in normal space. His ship's systems slowly came back online and the stars returned to view. He looked around and saw he was far from the planet near the border of human space again. His heart was racing, but the instruments were stable this time. He checked the records and saw a new entry in his data log. It said, "Message recorded. Silence protocol." Restored, he did not remember writing. Yet he sat quietly thinking about everything that had happened. He wondered if what he saw was real or just a vision made by whatever controlled that place. He felt different inside. As if part of him had stayed behind with the Guardians, he decided to head toward a communication relay where he could try to send a warning to the Galactic Council. As he traveled through space, he kept feeling a faint vibration under his seat, like the echo of a heartbeat. He ignored it and focused on writing. His report, he described everything from the station to the beacon and the planet. He ended the message with the words, "The silence is not an empty border. It is a living warning." He transmitted the message to the nearest relay and waited for a reply. Hours passed, but no answer came finally. The system beeped, showing that the message had been received and stored. He felt some relief and leaned back in his seat, but then the screen flashed a red light saying, "Message access, restricted authority." Override. His relief turned to fear when he saw that the file was already marked as deleted by the central system. Before he even finished reading the notice, he knew the council would never allow the truth to spread. He realized that by trying to warn them, he had only drawn their attention again. He changed course toward the outer rim, planning to disappear before they could track him. His fuel was low and his body was exhausted, but he kept going for days without rest. Sometimes, he thought, he saw faint blue lights following him from a distance. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But deep down, he knew the Guardians were still watching, maybe making sure he kept his promise to tell no one else. After several long days, he reached a small moon with abandoned mining stations and landed there to hide. He shut down all systems except life support and sat in the dark cabin listening to the quiet. He tried to sleep, but he could not. His dreams were filled with images of the white mist and the human figure calling to him. When he woke, he felt that same vibration again, stronger. This time, he turned on the scanner and saw an energy field forming outside the moon like a dome. He went to the window and saw faint, blue lines stretching across the horizon. They looked exactly like the ones he saw on the planet. He whispered, "No, not again." He ran back to the controls and tried to start the engines, but the power would not come on the lights. In the cabin flickered, and a familiar voice filled the air. It said, "You were told to rest now, it is done." Kyle shouted, "Why are you doing this?" "I did what you asked." The voice replied, "The silence must remain. We will help you keep it forever." Before he could answer, the ship, filled with a soft blue light, everything became still. His last thought was that maybe the Guardians were not punishing him. Maybe they were saving him from himself. When the light faded, the moon was quiet again. His ship sat motionless among the rocks with no sign of life inside. The systems went dark, and the sky above returned to its normal black color as if nothing had happened. Hours later, a patrol drone passing through the sector detected an unidentified signal coming from the moon. It approached and scanned the ship, finding no living being on board, only a faint pulse from the data core. The drone retrieved the ship and sent it back to the central authority. When the technicians opened it, they found a single message playing. On repeat it said, "This is Kale, the silence is alive, do not enter human space." Then the recording erased itself, and the data core melted, leaving no trace of the message. The ship was sealed and stored in a restricted hangar where no one was allowed to study it again. But sometimes engineers working late at the hangar say they hear faint whispers coming from the sealed ship. Soft voices that sound human, repeating the same words again and again. "The silence is mercy. The silence is mercy." Years passed after Kale's ship was found and locked away. The story of what happened near the border of human space was soon forgotten by most people, and the file about the silent region was marked as restricted. No one was allowed to enter or talk about it. But rumors still moved quietly through the deep corners of the galaxy, where traders and wanderers told stories around dim lights about a pilot who went beyond the chart and came back changed. Some said he vanished again. Some said he saw the end of all things, but no one knew the truth. Far away from the core worlds, a young explorer named Lyra was studying old star maps. She was fascinated by the empty space near the human border. Every map stopped at the same point with the same warning, silence zone, do not enter. She could not stop thinking about it. She wanted to know why a whole section of space was left uncharted in a time when every system had been scanned and mapped. She found one old report from the past. It was short and filled with missing data. But one name appeared: Kale. She started searching for more, and after months of quiet work, she found that a sealed ship was kept in a forgotten hangar near the edge of the Central Authority's research ring. It matched the description of the ship from the story. She decided to see it with her own eyes one night. She used her clearance as a junior researcher to slip inside the hangar. It was dark and cold. The ship stood there, covered with dust and silence. Its metal surface still had faint marks of blue as if it had once glowed. She felt a strange pull, like the ship was calling to her. She walked closer and placed her hand on it. The metal was warm. She stepped back surprised, and the ship lights flickered weakly as if waking from sleep. A low sound filled the air like a breath after a long rest. A soft voice spoke. It said, "You should not be here." She froze and looked around, but no one was there. She asked, "Who are you?" The voice replied, "This vessel remembers." Her heart was racing. She asked what happened to the pilot, Kale. The voice paused, then said, "He kept his promise." "The silence remains." She whispered, "What silence?" The voice said, "The silence that saves the living from what lies beyond." She felt both fear and curiosity. She asked, "Can I see what he saw?" The voice answered, "If you wish, you will not return the same." She hesitated, then said, "Show me the truth." The ship lights brightened slowly, and a wave of blue light spread through the hangar. She felt weightless, and then the floor vanished. She opened her eyes and found herself floating in space. The stars around her looked twisted as if she was inside a reflection. She saw the edge of human space ahead, and beyond it the same white mist Kale had described. A soft hum filled the air as if something alive was moving just out of sight. She heard faint whispers too distant to understand. She turned slowly and saw a shadow forming inside the mist. It looked like a figure made of light. The same human shape Kale had seen. The voice spoke again. It said, "They wait for those who seek them." She asked, "Who are they?" The voice said, "The ones who remain to guard what must not return." She drifted closer, unable to stop herself, and the figure reached out its hand toward her. She felt warmth again, but also sadness so deep it made her chest ache. The figure spoke without moving its lips. It said, "Why have you come?" She answered, "I wanted to know what was hidden." The figure said, "Knowledge is not always light. Sometimes it is a door you cannot close." She asked, "What lies beyond the silence?" The figure said, "The end of meaning, the place where thought and creation become one and none." She did not understand, but she felt the truth of it deep inside her bones. It was not death, it was something larger than death, something that dissolved everything into one endless stillness. The figure looked at her gently and said, "You must return. Tell them not to come." She said, "They will not believe me." The figure said, "Then leave a mark that they cannot ignore." Suddenly, the light around her grew stronger, and she felt herself pulled back into the ship. She gasped and fell to the floor of the hangar. The lights dimmed, and everything was quiet again. She looked at the ship and saw faint symbols glowing along its side. They were not human letters, but they looked like patterns of stars shifting slowly. She reached out and touched one, and it felt alive like a heartbeat. She knew what she had seen was not a dream. It was a warning. She tried to tell her supervisors about it, but they only smiled and told her that the ship was deactivated, and she must have imagined it when she showed them the glowing marks. The marks were gone. She realized someone or something was covering up the truth. She decided to keep her discovery secret. She left the station soon after and started traveling toward the border. Her mind filled with the sound of that voice telling her to warn others. She knew she would have to see it again to understand. Her journey took weeks. She moved quietly through uncharted systems, using old routes that few ships still traveled. She saw strange lights sometimes in the distance, and each time, she felt the same vibration she had felt near the ship when she finally reached the edge of human space. Her scanner stopped working. The stars looked dimmer, as if she had crossed an invisible wall. She felt fear, but also peace. She whispered to herself, "Kale, if you are still there, I will finish what you started." Then a faint light appeared in front of her, a single point of blue growing brighter. She followed it carefully. It led her to a small world, drifting alone in the dark. It looked calm, covered in soft mist. When she landed and stepped outside, she saw the ground shining faintly like glass under her boots. She walked until she reached a wide plain, and there she saw something that made her heart stop. There were countless ships lying, in silence, half buried in the ground, all of them from different races, old and new. Some broken, some whole, all empty. She realized others had come before her and none had returned. She looked up and saw shapes moving in the mist, tall, glowing forms. Like towers breathing slowly, she felt no fear now. Only understanding. One of the shapes turned toward her and she heard a voice. It was the same calm tone as before. It said, "You have come to see the silence." She nodded and said, "I came to learn," and to warn, the voice said, "Then you will learn through silence." Light spread around her and everything became still. She saw images flash before her eyes. Humans building great machines. Humans reaching beyond the stars, and then humans disappearing into light. She saw Kale standing among them, looking peaceful, his eyes glowing softly. He turned and smiled at her as if saying, "It is all right." Then the vision faded, and she was alone on the plain. The ships were gone, and the mist was clear. She looked at the sky and saw a new constellation forming above it. Looked like a map, drawn by stars marking the edge of human space. She realized it was the mark the figure had spoken about, a warning that would stay forever carved in light. She fell to her knees and whispered, "Thank you." Then everything went dark. When she woke again, she was back in her own ship, floating near the border. The planet was gone. Her scanners showed empty space. She checked her flight log and saw that months had passed, though. To her it felt like hours. She tried to send a message, but the system only showed one short line already written. It said, "Silence protected." She smiled softly and whispered, "I understand." She turned her ship around and headed back toward the known systems, her eyes filled with tears but her heart calm. She never told anyone what she saw. She simply left behind her own mark on the new charts of the galaxy. When the next generation of explorers opened those maps, they saw that the border of human space had changed. There was now a new note written in simple words: "Beyond this line, there is only silence. Those who ask will not return." And for a long time, no one dared to go past it again. But sometimes, when ships pass near that edge, they report, hearing faint voices over the comm systems, whispering softly like wind through stars. And if they listen closely, they can almost make out the words, "We keep the silence for you." Many years passed since Lyra's ship returned from the border, and the silence around human space became a legend that spread across the galaxy like a soft whisper. Every generation told the story in a different way. Some said it was a holy boundary. Others said it was a curse. But no one dared to cross it again. The galaxy grew busier and louder while that one quiet part stayed untouched. Traders called it the sleeping zone. Explorers called it the white wall. Scientists called it a gravitational anomaly. But those who listened carefully called it mercy. In the central archive where the oldest star maps were kept, a young historian named Aaron worked alone. Most of his nights he loved forgotten stories and lost names. He found comfort in the silence of the archive, surrounded by data no one cared to read. One night, while he was searching for records of early human expansion, he came across an old encrypted file hidden behind several layers of code. The file name was simple. It only said, "Silence." He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The screen filled with static, then a faint voice started to speak. The words were slow and quiet, like a breath through dust. "This is Kale. The silence is alive. Do not enter human space." Aaron froze. He had never heard a voice recording that old, still so clear. He played it again and again, and then he found another small file attached to it. It contained coordinates far beyond any current travel zone. Right where the galactic chart stopped. He felt something inside him stir, a mixture of fear and curiosity. He wanted to know if the silence was real or just another myth. He began studying everything he could find about the human border. He read reports about missing ships and mysterious energy signals. He found fragments of a research entry signed by someone named Lyra, but most of the text was erased. He could only read one sentence beyond this line. "There is only silence. Those who ask will not return." He printed the map and kept it hidden in his jacket for days. The thought kept him awake at night until one evening he decided to go see it himself. He knew it was madness, but he felt like he had to finish what Kale and Lyra had started. He stole an old explorer ship from the docking ring and left quietly without telling anyone. The stars looked calm as he traveled through the outer systems. But the deeper he went, the quieter. Everything became the usual background noise of space, faded until he could hear only his own breath and the soft hum of the engine. He checked his radar, but there were no other signals around, not even stray satellites. It was as if the galaxy itself ended there. He whispered to himself, "I just need to see it once and then I will return." When he reached the coordinates, he expected to find empty space, but instead his scanners showed faint energy lines shaped like a pattern, a shape repeating endlessly. He tried to adjust the view, and the pattern changed, forming symbols he did not recognize. He leaned closer and whispered softly, "What are you trying to tell me?" Suddenly his screen flashed bright blue and all systems shut down. He was thrown from his seat as the ship trembled outside the stars, stretched like threads, and then everything went white. When he opened his eyes, he was floating in silence. The ship was gone. The stars were gone, and he was surrounded by the same white mist Kale and Lyra had seen. He could breathe, though he had no suit, and he could feel the air around him warm and gentle. He turned slowly and saw shapes moving inside the mist, tall and silent, made of light. They looked almost human. One of them stepped forward and spoke softly. "You should not have come, Aaron," felt his voice catch in his throat, and said, "I just wanted to know what the silence means." The figure said, "It means peace." He asked, "What are you?" The figure said, "We are what remains of them." He said, "Of humans." The figure nodded and said, "Yes. They built us and then became us when they understood what waited beyond the edge." Aaron said, "What is beyond the edge?" The figure looked at him kindly and said, "The place where sound dies, where thought has no shape, where all that was becomes one. You call it silence. But it is more than that. It is the memory of everything." Aaron felt both awe and sorrow. He said, "Why keep others away?" The figure answered, "Because not all are ready to see what we have seen." He looked around and saw thousands of lights forming, shapes and patterns. They were not stars. They were memories. He could hear faint voices, laughter and cries, words spoken long ago and then fading into soft, quiet tones. He realized the silence was not empty. It was full of echoes of everything that ever lived. The figure said, "Kale warned them. Lyra marked the border. Now you will close it for good." Aaron asked how, and the figure said, "By remembering." He did not understand. But before he could ask more, the light around him began to change, turning brighter until he could not see anything. When he woke again, he was back in his ship, his hands shaking, his breath fast. The stars outside looked normal, but there was a new mark on his screen, a single line of text written in calm blue light. Silence. Complete. He stared at it for a long time, not knowing what it meant. He tried to send a message to the nearest relay, but the system only replied, "Transmission. Denied." He realized he was completely alone, yet he did not feel fear, only peace. He looked out at the stars and whispered softly, "Thank you." Days later, his ship was found drifting near the border with no life signs inside, but the black box showed that the ship's power never failed and the cabin's air was full. The report said, "Pilot, missing, presumed lost in deep space." But those who studied the data noticed something strange. The border itself had shifted after Aaron's last transmission. It had grown wider by a few light years, as if space itself had moved to hide something deeper. The council declared the region permanently restricted and marked it with a new name, the Silent Frontier. They told everyone that it was unstable space, and no one should approach it. But some people refused to believe the official report. Smugglers and explorers still spoke of seeing blue lights at the edge of their sensors and hearing faint voices when they passed too close. The same three names appeared in their stories: Kyle Lyra and Aaron, one old pilot who had been traveling the outer lanes for 50 years, swore he once saw three human shapes standing on a small moon near the border, glowing faintly blue like ghosts. They looked peaceful, he said, and they raised their hands as if greeting him. He tried to contact them, but his radio filled with static, and when it cleared, the moon was gone. He told this story to his grandchildren, and they laughed, calling it an old man's dream. But he always ended with the same words: "The silence is not death, it is kindness." Centuries later, when new civilizations rose and others faded, the border still remained the same. No map ever passed it, no signal ever returned from beyond it, and the few who tried to challenge it simply vanished. It became a sacred space in the minds of many, a place not to be feared but to be respected. Every culture gave it a name: the Wall of Mercy, the Edge of Light, the Dreaming Line. Yet all meant the same: the place where humans once reached too far and chose to rest instead of rule. Sometimes, deep sensors still catch small pulses from that region, soft rhythmic beats that sound almost like a heartbeat. When scientists study them, they find that each pulse matches the rhythm of a human resting heart. No one can explain it, but those who listen closely say it feels like someone breathing in the dark, waiting patiently as if the silence itself is alive, still watching, still guarding. In the end, the silence became a story told to children before sleep, a story about those who went beyond the stars and found something so beautiful and terrible that they chose to protect the rest of life from ever facing it. The story of Kale, who saw the truth, Lyra, who carried the message, and Aaron, who sealed it. And sometimes when the galaxy grows too loud, when wars rage and empires fall, people look up at the night sky toward the quiet border and remember that somewhere beyond that calm line, there are still voices whispering gently, "We keep the silence for you," and the silence remains.